Thomas and the Great Railway Show. Written by Chris Awdry. Story 1. Museum Piece.
"I don't believe it," muttered Gordon furiously. "What's Thomas got an important engine like me hasn't? Tell me that. Gallivanting off to museums. Bah!"
"He is old," said James. "If the Fat Controller says he wants to be a museum piece, why should we worry?" "It's not fair, though," grumbled Henry. "For a chance like this, he wouldn't have minded being a museum piece himself." The jealous engines all ignored Thomas when they saw him at the junction. Thomas didn't care. He was too excited. "Why me?" Thomas asked Percy and Toby. "Fancy, the National Railway Museum people at... where is it? York? Wanting me to go there. They've never even seen me."
"Yes, they have,"
said Percy.
"On television," added Toby. "The Fat Controller told us about it."
He and Percy wanted to go with Thomas, but they knew that someone had to stay and run the branch line while he was away. "How much longer do we go?" Thomas asked his driver every morning.
"One day less than when you asked before,"
laughed his driver.
"Anyone would think you ought to be a museum piece."
Thomas grinned. "Gordon, Henry and James are just jealous," he chuckled. "Who else is at this museum? Is Flying Scotsman there, or Duck's friend, City of Truro?"
We shall have to wait and see," said the fireman. "I'll be very surprised if there isn't someone you can remember from the old days."
And that, of course, made Thomas more excited than ever. At last the day came. A large crowd came to the junction to see Thomas off, and the Fat Controller was there too.
"Goodbye, Thomas," he said. "Enjoy yourself, and be a credit to our railway."
Everyone gave 3 cheers, and Thomas set off. They rounded across the island and over the bridge leading to the other railway. It was a slow journey, but at last they reached a place Thomas's driver called Carnforth, where they rested for a night in a big shed. Next day they went on. At Skipton, Thomas stopped for a drink and to let a goods train overtake him. While they waited, it began to rain. In a signal box, a little way ahead, the signalman opened his level crossing gates for Thomas and set the signals to clear. Suddenly he heard a crack and then a rattle from the level crossing. The lock on a gate had broken, and the wind was swinging the gate across the line. Steam appeared above the trees as Thomas drew near. "Wow!" exclaimed the signalman, and quickly resetting the signal to danger, ran to mend the gate. Thomas had never felt happier. His fire was bright, and even the rain didn't depress him. They neared the signal. Its arm was up, showing the line ahead was clear. Away we go, puffed Thomas happily. He was just passing the signal when he heard a clang as the signal arm fell to danger.
"Whoa, Thomas!"
cried the driver, and put the brakes hard on. "What?" Thomas began. But then he saw, just in front, a heavy level crossing gate swinging towards him across the line. The signalman tried to stop it, but the gate was wet and slipped from his hand. "Ooh!" groaned Thomas as he skidded along the rails. "Help! I must stop!" But the rain had made the rails slippery, and he couldn't. He slithered helplessly. He was still moving when he reached the level crossing. With a loud crack, the gate broke against his buffer beam. "Ouch!" said Thomas, and he stopped. The signalman ran to his telephone and directed Thomas to a siding where an inspector examined him. His buffer beam was bent, and one of his buffers was broken.
Can't go on like that. Not on the railway, anyhow."
"But I'm supposed to be in York tomorrow," wailed Thomas.
"I know that," said the inspector. "Never mind, leave it to me, and I'll see what can be done."
With that, Thomas had to be content. Story 2. Not the Ticket. Thomas had to stay in the siding for the rest of the day. His fire went out and grew colder and colder. The rain fell more heavily, and what had begun as a splendid day began to turn into a disaster. "I wish I was in my nice warm shed," he said to himself miserably. At last the inspector returned.
"Cheer up, Thomas," he said. "You'll be in a museum tomorrow, and they've promised to mend your front end in their workshop."
"Thank you, sir," said Thomas. "But if I can't run on rails, how can I get there?"
"It's all fixed," replied the inspector cheerfully. "A lorry's coming for you in the morning."
Thomas was horrified. lorry?" he stammered.
"That's right," said the inspector. "You'll be here at 8 o'clock sharp."
Thomas slept badly that night. He kept wondering what Gordon, Henry and James would say if they knew he had finished his journey on a lorry. He almost thought he could hear them laughing. Next morning, the driver and fireman came early. A diesel shunter came to push Thomas out of his siding and along towards the road where they found the lorry waiting. A steel cable was fastened to his coupling. The lorry driver started the winch, and in no time at all, Thomas was perched on the lorry. How undignified, he thought. But he found, as they went along, he had a marvellous view of the countryside, and time to enjoy it too. But Thomas soon began to feel bored. At last, houses began to appear on either side of the road. Perhaps this is York, thought Thomas hopefully. It was, but the driver wasn't sure of his way. He parked the lorry and went to find a telephone. A man wearing a flat-top cap with a yellow band round it came up to Thomas. "Hello," said Thomas. Said the man. He wrote something in his notebook and went round to the front of the lorry. When the lorry driver came back, Thomas heard him say something and slammed the door crossly. Soon they reached a large building with rails running into it. Thomas was unloaded and the lorry drove away. Thomas looked about him. He had arrived. When the driver and fireman came, Thomas told them about the man with the flat-top cap. They laughed loudly. "How'd you do it, Thomas?" spluttered the driver when he could speak. "That'll make the Fat Controller's day. Thomas booked for parking." Story 3. Trouble on the Line. The museum people were as good as their word. Thomas went at once into the workshop where his buffer beam was soon straightened and a new buffer bolted on. In the workshop was a green engine like Flying Scotsman, but smaller. He was called Green Arrow.
"My brother and I were built to run fast goods trains," he said. "But we did it so well they let us pull expresses too in the end. Now I'm the only one of my sort left."
Green Arrow was so friendly that, when Thomas was mended, he was sorry to leave him. But, back at the Great Railway Show, he was thrilled to see, instead, one of Stepney's brothers, Box Hill, an engine he remembered from the old days. Thomas was moved to a special position.
"There's no doubt about it," said his driver. "You're a star attraction."
"Is that being a credit to the Fat Controller?" asked Thomas. He was anxious to make up for the parking ticket. One morning, Thomas's driver arrived in great excitement.
"We're to give rides on the demonstration line," he said.
Thomas was delighted. The 3 demonstration lines were different sizes. One was narrower than Thomas's, and the third was used by a very wide engine called Iron Duke.
"That is broad gauge," he explained. "The Great Western Railway used it until about 100 years ago."
Thomas wondered if Duck knew about broad gauge. It would be nice to tell him something about the Great Western, he thought. The engines had to take great care because of the many visitors. Thomas was anxious. Some people were not as careful as they should have been. Thomas had never seen so many crowds. "Oh, we must watch out," he told his driver. "What would happen if a child got onto the line?"
"Don't you worry, Thomas," replied the driver. "There are plenty of good strong barriers and we'll take care."
But Thomas did worry. He was afraid that, in an emergency, he might not be able to stop soon enough. Next morning, Thomas felt better. The sun was shining and he was looking forward to talking to Iron Duke again. He shunted happily backwards and forwards along the demonstration line all day. Then, nearly at closing time, it happened. Thomas saw something fly through the air and land on the rails in front of him. His driver saw it too and put the brakes hard on. "Beep, beep, beep!" Thomas whistled an alarm. "I must stop, I must!" Thomas shuddered to a halt and a great cloud of steam wheeshed noisily from his thundercocks. But he couldn't stop before he hit the bundle. It burst. Sandwiches and crisps flew in all directions, while pop from a broken bottle fizzed over Thomas's wheels. In the crowd, a child frightened by the steam cried loudly. "I want to go home, Mummy, now!" screamed the child. "You noisy great engine!" shouted his mother, waving his fist at Thomas. "I'm going to see the manager!" "Oh dear," thought Thomas. "That's not the way to be a credit to the Fat Controller." "You did very well," comforted his driver. "Thank goodness it was only a lunch pack and not a child on the line. The fireman's expecting Thomas. "Hey, look at this!" he shouted. The driver went to see. "Oh, you damaged your brakes when you stopped suddenly," he told Thomas. "No more work until they're fixed, I'm afraid." "Never mind. If the people here today have learned that engines can't stop at once, that's a good thing." Thomas hoped they had. Story 4. Thomas and the Railtour. The engines were excited. There were to be some special rail tours to the seaside, and no one knew which engine would be chosen to pull them.
"It ought to be me," observed Mallard. "After all, that seaside place helped pay for my repairs."
The others thought someone else should have a chance. Thomas knew he would not be chosen, but he enjoyed listening to the others arguing. He was pleased in the end when it was decided to give the trips to Green Arrow. When Green Arrow returned from the first tour, he said he had never seen so many people. Soon there were talks of putting on extra trains. This was not possible. "All we can do is add extra coaches," they said. "But then Green Arrow can't pull a train that heavy on his own."
"Of course I can," he scoffed. "My brothers and I did the same during the war."
"Can I help?" asked Thomas. The man in charge stared. "I don't see why not," he said. In the morning, Thomas's fireman arrived early. Thomas's fire was lit, and while the warmth crept through his boiler, his fireman made sure all his moving parts were well oiled. Behind, Green Arrow was being prepared too, and when they were both ready, they set off to find their coaches. The station platform was jammed with an admiring crowd, which didn't seem to get any smaller, even after a trainload of people were in their seats. Thomas was coupled in front. He was pleased. He liked to see where he was going. At the seaside station, Thomas was turned round so he can be in front again. After a rest, the engines set off once more. A ruined abbey stood at a place where the line curved beside a river. A crowd had gathered to wave and cheer, but Thomas wasn't watching them. Looking ahead, he had seen something strange. "Beep, beep! Stop, stop!" he whistled in alarm. The train was heavy and hard to stop, but they managed it just in time. Now everyone was able to see that, in front of Thomas, the rail near the river was lower than the one on the other side.
The water has undermined the embankment," said the inspector. "I'll go to the signal box and sort things out."
Buses came for the passengers, but it was late before the men decided it would be safe to use the other track. Together, the engines pushed their coaches back to a crossover. On his own, Thomas crept slowly past the landslip. Then, very carefully, Green Arrow pulled the empty coaches by and, together, they pulled the train back to York. A few days later, a party of important-looking people came to the museum. One was the man in charge, and behind was the Fat Controller. "Oh dear," thought Thomas, "they've come to take me away for frightening that child." But the Fat Controller was smiling. The man in charge held up his hand for silence.
"Thomas," said the man in charge, "your controller has told me you're a really useful engine. He's right. For saving a nasty accident the other day, we have decided that you should become an honorary member of the National Railway Collection. This plate will remind you of your visit to us. Ladies and gentlemen, 3 cheers for Thomas the Tank Engine."
"Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray!" The noise nearly raised the roof.
"Well done, Thomas," smiled the Fat Controller. "I knew you'd be a credit to our railway.